The Flitchman Fortune. A Hank Sledge Mystery Part 1. The Missing Heiress. The heat hung over the city like a wet blanket soaked in sweat and sin. My office fan wheezed like an old man with bad lungs, pushing the thick August air around without cooling a damn thing. The newspaper was stuck to my desk with moisture, the headlines bleeding ink like fresh wounds. Furniture heiress vanishes. Police baffled. I knocked back what was left of my bourbon and studied the grainy photograph of Abigail Flitchman, 24 years old, blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, and eyes that probably saw right through the phonies and frauds that circled money like flies on roadkill. The kind of dame who could run a business empire and look good doing it. The story was thin on details, thick on speculation. Abigail Flitchman, heir apparent to the Flitchman furniture fortune, had disappeared 3 days ago from her Park Avenue penthouse. No signs of struggle, no ransom note, just gone like smoke in a hurricane. I was lighting my 4th lucky strike of the evening when she walked in. She moved like expensive whiskey pours, smooth, deliberate, with just enough heat to make you pay attention. Her dress cost more than most people made in a month, black silk that hugged curves in all the right places. But it was her eyes that grabbed me by the throat. Green as fresh money and twice as dangerous. Mr. Sledge. Her voice had that finishing school polish with just a hint of Brooklyn underneath. I'm Victoria Flitchman. I believe you've been reading about my sister. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Take a load off, sweetheart. Though from what I hear, your family's already lost quite a load. She didn't smile. Dames with that kind of money rarely found my jokes funny. The police are useless. They think Abigail ran off with some man, but that's impossible. Why's that impossible? Even rich girls get lonely. Victoria's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. You don't know my sister. Abigail doesn't do anything without a plan. She's been groomed since childhood to take over the company. Romance was always secondary to business. I stubbed out my cigarette and leaned back. What makes you think she didn't just decide the family business wasn't worth the headache? Maybe she wanted to see what life was like without grandfather's golden handcuffs. Because she was excited about something. The last time I saw her, she said she discovered something that would secure the family's future forever. Those were her exact words. Victoria opened her purse and pulled out a roll of bills thick enough to choke a horse. I'll pay you $500 to find her, Mr. Sledge, plus expenses. 500 simoleons was serious money. The kind of money that made a private dick overlook the fact that rich families usually had more secrets than a politician has lies. All right, sweetheart, you've got yourself a detective, but I work my way, no interference from the family. Victoria stood up, smoothing her dress. Find her, Mr. Sledge. Find her before she stopped herself. Before what? Before something happens to her that money can't fix. After she left, trailing expensive perfume and mystery, I sat back and thought about what I'd gotten myself into. The Flitchman family tree was old money, the kind that grew deep roots in New York soil. Ambrose Flitchman had built his fortune one handcrafted chair at a time, turning sweat and sawdust into an empire. His son Arthur had kept the business growing, but it was Abigail who was supposed to be the future. And futures, especially ones worth millions, had a way of making people desperate. I grabbed my hat and headed for the door. The night was young, the city was full of secrets, and somewhere out there, a missing heiress was either in trouble or causing it. The Flitchman mansion sat on the Upper East Side like a fat cat on a silk cushion. Even in the darkness, it reeked of old money and older secrets. The butler who answered the door looked like he'd been carved from the same expensive wood the family peddled. Mr. Arthur Flitchman is expecting you, sir. This way. Arthur Flitchman was a small man trying to fill a big chair behind an enormous desk. His thinning hair was combed over a scalp that gleamed with nervous sweat, and his handshake felt like grabbing a dead fish. "Mr. Sledge, thank you for coming. I understand Victoria has retained your services." "That's right. I need to know everything about your daughter's disappearance. Start with the last time you saw her." Arthur's eyes darted around the room like a cornered rat. "3 days ago at dinner. She seemed preoccupied, kept checking her watch, barely touched her food." "She say where she was going?" "Back to her apartment. She had some business papers to review." He paused, wringing his hands. "Mr. Sledge, you have to understand. Abigail isn't just my daughter, she's the future of this company. Without her." "Without her what?" "The business goes to her brother Thomas." Arthur's face went pale. Thomas has his own interests. He's not suited for this kind of responsibility." Before I could press him further, the study door burst open. The man who stumbled in looked like he'd been poured into his expensive suit, and someone forgot to mention it was supposed to fit. His tie was askew, his hair was mussed, and he reeked of gin and cheap perfume. Well, if it isn't the family bloodhound." Thomas Flitchman swayed slightly as he pointed at me with a glass that was more empty than full. "Come to sniff out our dirty laundry, detective." "Thomas, please," Arthur started, but his son cut him off. "Please what, Dad? Please pretend everything's fine. Please pretend that dear sweet Abigail didn't finally wise up and blow this suffocating mausoleum." Thomas laughed, but it sounded more like a bark. "Maybe she realized that being groomed like a prize poodle wasn't worth it." "You seem pretty happy about your sister's disappearance," I said, watching his reaction. Thomas's eyes focused on me with sudden clarity. "Happy? Detective, I'm ecstatic. For the first time in my life, I might actually matter to this family." Arthur stood up abruptly. "Thomas, go sleep it off. We'll discuss this in the morning." As Thomas stumbled out, he turned back to me. "You want some free advice, Flatfoot? Look for the money. In this family, everything always comes back to the money." After Thomas left, Arthur slumped back in his chair like a deflated balloon. "You'll have to forgive my son. He's upset about Abigail's position in the company. Upset enough to do something about it. Thomas is weak, Mr. Sledge, but he's not violent. Besides, he was here all evening 3 days ago, playing poker with friends until nearly dawn." I made a mental note to check that alibi. In my experience, when money and family mixed, alibis had a way of dissolving like sugar in rain. "I'll need to see Abigail's apartment." Arthur nodded and handed me a key. "The police have already been through it, but perhaps you'll see something they missed." Abigail's penthouse was a study in controlled elegance. Everything had its place, from the perfectly aligned books to the fresh flowers that someone was still delivering. The kind of order that spoke of a mind that didn't leave things to chance. I went through the apartment room by room, looking for what the cops had missed. In her bedroom, I found a small leather appointment book tucked behind some perfume bottles on her vanity. The entry for the day she disappeared had only one notation: RM, 8 p.m., Pier 47. RM could be anybody, but Pier 47 was down in the warehouse district. Not exactly the kind of place where a society princess would normally spend her evening. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd. On her nightstand was a small silver frame, but it was face down. I picked it up and saw a photograph of Abigail with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of smile that probably cost plenty of hearts. But it was what was written on the back of the photo that made me whistle low. "All my love, forever yours, RM." So RM wasn't just a business appointment. He was personal, very personal. I pocketed the photo and headed for Pier 47. The night was getting interesting, and in my line of work, interesting usually meant dangerous. The warehouse district at midnight was darker than a politician's soul. Pier 47 sat at the end of a row of abandoned buildings that looked like broken teeth, against the skyline. The only light came from a few scattered street lamps that flickered like dying stars. I parked half a block away and walked the rest. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the empty buildings like gunshots in a cathedral. Whatever had happened to Abigail Flitchman, I had a feeling this pier held some of the answers. As I approached the end of the pier, I saw something that made me stop cold. Tire tracks, fresh ones, leading right to the edge of the water. And there, caught on a splintered piece of the wooden railing, was a piece of black silk that looked like it had been torn from an expensive dress. I was bending down to examine the fabric when I heard the footsteps behind me. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. I spun around, my hand moving instinctively toward the .38 in my shoulder holster, but I was too slow. The sap caught me right behind the ear, and the last thing I saw before the darkness took me was a pair of expensive Italian shoes that probably cost more than my car. When I came to, I was looking at more stars than I'd seen since I was a kid in the country. Unfortunately, these stars were courtesy of the knock on my skull, not the night sky. I was still on the pier, but someone had thoughtfully dragged me behind a stack of crates. My watch said 3 a.m. My head felt like it had been used for batting practice, but everything else seemed to be in working order. Whoever had cold-cocked me wanted me unconscious, not dead. That was either very good news or very bad news, depending on why they'd wanted me out of the way. I checked my pockets. My wallet was still there, along with the photograph from Abigail's apartment. But my gun was gone, and so was any trace of whoever had been wearing those expensive shoes. As I stood up, fighting a wave of dizziness, I noticed something glinting in the moonlight near the edge of the pier. I walked over and found a gold cufflink with the initials RM engraved in fancy script. It was wedged between two boards like someone had dropped it in a struggle. Things were starting to add up, and I didn't like the total. Abigail had arranged to meet RM at this pier. There were signs of a struggle. And now RM's cufflink was evidence in what was looking more and more like a kidnapping, or worse. I pocketed the cufflink and headed back to my car. Dawn was still a few hours away, but I had work to do. Somewhere in this city, RM was either a kidnapper or a victim himself. And somewhere else, Abigail Flitchman was either dead or wishing she was. Either way, I was going to find out which. End of part 1. Will Hank discover the identity of the mysterious RM? What happened at Pier 47 that night? And is Abigail Flitchman still alive? Don't miss part 2 of the Flitchman fortune, coming soon. Like this story, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling installment. What do you think happened to Abigail? Drop your theories in the comments below.